Alright, today we're going to dive into the Parthenon. Basically, the ancient Greek equivalent of a flex-off, where Athens was like, we're better than you, and here's a massive marble monument to prove it, you silly fools. And like, this wasn't just a temple for Athena, it was a statement piece. Basically, a 2,500-year-old Instagram post that said, yo, look at how good we are at building stuff. That's cool and all, but get this.
While the Athenians were all busy glazing all their architectural prowess, their intentions weren't specifically religious when it came to the actual construction of the Parthenon. I mean, yeah, they did want to honor Athena, but they also wanted to rub it in Sparta's face and remind them who the top dog really was. As Pericles himself flexed in his big funeral speech, Athens was the
School of Hellas,
which is basically the equivalent of saying that Athens was Harvard, MIT, and the Jade Palace from Kung Fu Panda all rolled into one. Additionally, the fact that he said that Athens was so good and implied that any other Greek city-states, which included Sparta, all fall short of how awesome Athens was. This was the greatest Greek D1 temple glaze of all time. Anyways, culturally speaking, the Greeks had all these different values, one of them being arete. Essentially, the characteristic of being insanely good at literally anything. Period. So naturally, when they decided to build this whopping great temple smack bang in the middle of Athens, they didn't cheap out or skip over any detail. They took looks maxing and turned it into temple maxing. They knew it wasn't enough to just slap some columns together and then call it a day. Nah, they basically baked mathematical illusions into the design to make it look flawless to the human eye. That tells you a lot about their mindset. Image and perception were just as important as function. Yeah, sure, they were expected to honor the gods, but they were also expected to project power, unity, and sophistication through public art and architecture. It's kind of like they were saying, man, if our temple looks this good, imagine how powerful we are. Anyhow, before we crown this the greatest historical masterpiece of all time, we've got to slow it down a minute while I break it down for you.
Let me break it down for you, Mark.
So, when we say that the Parthenon was a political flex, religious site, or an artistic masterpiece, we're still working with limited but consistent evidence. I mean, can we ever really know what the average John Athens felt like while walking past the Parthenon on his way to work? Probably not. But, given how much effort they did put into building the thing, it's pretty safe to say it wasn't about quiet reflection or mindfulness. Nah, it was more about showing off their cultural swagger to the entire ancient world. In its own time, the Parthenon wasn't just a building. It was ancient Greece's version of a cinematic universe, with every surface telling a story about why Athens was the main character. The metopes? Those were like 92 individual action movie posters carved into marble. They were basically a highlight reel of all of Athens' best moments in battle, literally. Here are a few of the metopes.
So, most of what we know typically comes from sources like Plutarch, who is basically the OG history YouTuber, except instead of pumping out tier lists, he was dropping massive essays about famous dudes from Greece and Rome. While he might not have been the most reliable bloke, he was entertaining as hell, kind of like if ancient history had clickbait. So, taking that fact into account, we actually do need to question if we're seeing the full picture or just a highlight reel. Sure, archaeology helps, but even there we're piecing together fragments and trying to guess the original vibe. I mean, from what I was able to gather while doing my rigorous research in the field, this Plutarch fellow was literally writing about Pericles and the building program of the Parthenon 500 years after it happened. Bro could not confidently go, yeah guys, trust me, I was there. He was relying on earlier sources. Most of which are now lost. Bro was not exactly the most favourable primary source, but here's what we've got. Also, not to forget that Pericles was really only heard about to the voice of Hey, what the hell is the script, bro? Come on.
It's not that deep.
What you giving me?
Read the goddamn script, alright?
Anyway, Also, not to forget that Pericles was only really heard through the voice of Thucydides, who was basically the obvious studio of the classical era. He pretty much transcribed everything important that Pericles had to say, but he did often paraphrase his speeches. He even says so in the history of the Peloponnesian War, Book 1. Insofar as these facts involve what the various participants said before and during the actual conflict, recalling the exact words of difficulty regarding speech I myself and my forms about speeches made elsewhere, and though I thought each would have said what was visualized in the situation, I say according to the possibility of my part, the overall sense of what was actually said.
Other than the metopes, there was the frieze.
We look like bad guys. Incompetent bad guys. Let's go freeze! Freeze!
I'm thirsty.
I said freeze!
I'm just getting a drink.
All right, had your drink. Now, I want you to...
I know. Freeze.
Basically, it was a 160-meter long art flex. It was carved around 447 to 432 BCE, and it was super important because normally you'd slap some myth or some gods onto a big art piece back then. But on the frieze, they depicted the living people of Athens, all taking part in a religious procession for Athena. I mean, they had gods, citizens, horses, elders, even just some random guys vibing. The whole crew pulled up for this photo op just to be on the frieze. And this was all really significant, because the Athenians basically looked at myth and tradition and went, nah, let's make this about us. And by us, let's just say their democracy. Anyway, let's move on from the past and look at the present day significance of the Parthenon. I mean, to start off, it basically became the blueprint for a bunch of modern architecture. Ever walked past one of them fancy-looking government buildings, a courthouse, or even some banks, and thought to yourself, yo, why does this kind of look like a temple, dog? Well, that's the Parthenon's fault. Basically, every country that wanted to look cool and legit stole the Athenians' homework and slapped a bunch of columns on their buildings. On top of that, it's actually a global symbol for democracy. Sure, Athens might not have made the perfect democracy, you know, women and slaves and foreigners were excluded, but the Parthenon still basically became the poster child for the idea of free citizens and having a say. Modern nations keep pointing to it like, see, our political system has ancient Greek street cred. Then there's tourism. Pardon my French, but frickin' millions of people still pull up to Athens just to gawk at the ruins. Which is pretty wild, considering it's been blown up, stripped, and looted more times than your average Minecraft anarchy server. The Parthenon basically keeps Athens on the global stage, both as a cultural flex and as a cash cow. Finally, it sparks huge debates about cultural heritage. The British Museum still has a bunch of the Parthenon marbles, and Greece has been saying for years, yo, give them back. So the Parthenon isn't just some dusty ruin, it's actively shaping international conversations about who owns the past. So basically, the Parthenon wasn't just some ancient Instagram post, because it's still trending 2,500 years later.